Hello, everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today for our panel. It's a lead dev online discussion created in partnership with CodeRabbit. The discussion will last about 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the panel Q&A channel. For those that are joining you live, I've just dropped into the chat. You can hear that awkward pause when I'm copy pasting and going into the chat. A link to the lead dev Slack community. It's really good. It's a really positive community. It's quite large, but so many different channels to help, leaders and staff plus engineers work through these times of great change. So definitely, I recommend that community in general. We may have time to answer a couple questions live, but so just submit them throughout. Please, you have a Q&A feature on our Zoom if you're joining us live, which that's the benefit you get because you get to ask the questions. So today, the grounded question in general is, can you trust your coding agents? Should you trust them? How can you trust them? Or in many ways, how can you trust them? So this is at least top of mind for really just everyone in companies, or it should be. Certainly every engineer and engineering and business leader should be really asking it. So today we're really diving deep into how to verify, debug, and audit AI agents that hopefully you can build that trust. So while we kick off, I'm going to shoot a poll. So thank you so much for that. And that poll will hopefully help you think about and say, have you in the last week run into a situation where you had no idea what the AI agent was doing? And the answers are, yes, I have run into a situation where I had no idea where the AI agent was doing. No, of course not. My agents are perfect, aligned. And oops, hadn't thought of that yet. So these are all valid answers, and we appreciate your honesty. So while that runs and while we get started, let's get started with some introductions. I'm Jennifer Riggins, and I'm everybody's favorite tech journalist and host, including for here at Lead Dev. Today, I'll be joined by Claire, Andrew, and Priyanka, who are ready to share their experiences and insights. Let's go in that order. If you can please introduce yourselves, Claire, Andrew, and Priyanka.
So hi there, I'm Claire Reckless, and I'm a senior engineering manager at Aways, who are a holiday lettings company, and I'm based in Manchester in the UK. So I joined Aways in mid-March this year. So I'm still fairly new to the organisation, which has been a really great way for me to come at this topic with fresh eyes. I'm learning alongside the teams and the engineers as well. I'm especially looking forward to the conversation today because we're very much still in that learning phase as an industry. The teams I work with are comparatively pretty early on in their journey. And there's a really good opportunity to share what's working and what isn't, and talk about how we build confidence in the tools that we're using here. And I'm excited to learn from the other panelists as well. So thank you.
Amazing. Hi, my name is Andrew. I'm a go-to-market engineer at Linear B. We're an engineering productivity platform for software leaders to understand AI's impact within their SDLC. I'm also the host of Dev Interrupted. We're an agentic engineering podcast and newsletter for software engineering leaders. And us, like everyone else right now, are tackling all of the challenges underpinning the changes in software development. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. Trust is a really finicky beast. And so today I think we're going to have some really interesting conversations around how to earn that.
Priyanka.
Hey everyone, I'm Priyanka. I'm the staff product manager at CodeRabbit. I joined CodeRabbit in January of this year. I'm based in San Mateo, California, and trust is something that we think about every day. It's the bread and butter of the products that we build at CodeRabbit. I think we've moved way past when Agentic AI first came into the picture, and now it's really all about trust. So I'm very excited to be here to learn from the other panelists on how they're thinking about it, and also share how we've been building products with keeping trust as the front and center of everything that we do.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. So let's look at that poll result. So for those that are joining us live, you'll see, but I'll read aloud. So have you in the last week run into a situation where you had no idea what the agent was doing and why? And 64% said yes, 28% said no, and 8% said they hadn't thought of that. Okay, I think it's very interesting because I think this was a very good question. Good job, team. Wasn't mine. I think very modest. No. Where you're talking about if you had an idea what the agent was doing and why. So to kick off, I want to know, is trust the word we should be using right now? Because is trust something is that a word we should be using about things? And we have to admit they're things. The agents are things. So is trust something that we want? Is that even the vocabulary we want to use?
I think that's a very interesting point because trust has a very human connotation. And when AI started off, it was basically just an LLM chat, right? That was the very first generation of AI that we had. But I think we've moved past into the world today where the agent is actually acting on behalf of someone. So, they, for example, have write access to the production system. When a pull request goes out in the wild, it has the name of the author, but it's the agent which is acting under the hood. It's also like, the actions that it is taking on, the cost of being wrong is much higher. For example, it's responsible for giving back refunds or answering customer questions. So the stakes are really high. And as we're seeing more and more adoption and like sensitive context, I think uh, agents have humanized. And it's really about can we trust them with these higher responsibilities, just as we would think about an intern graduating into a full-time employee or a full-time employee graduating more into further promotions. So I think the whole process is humanized a lot since the first wave of chat-based LLMs.
Yeah, I think that's a good characterization of trust. And Jen, to answer your question about can things have trust, I certainly think so. I think trust is a very externalized concept, and while it is deeply humanized, and we as humans have levels of trust between each other and our organizations and our world, we also have trust with the things and the systems that keep us safe and healthy, and so that is not any different for code, which now is everywhere, not any different for software, which impacts our health, which impacts our quality of life, and so trust absolutely, I think, is still on the table. It still has to be something that's earned, in fact, because trust is, I called it a finicky beast at the beginning because it's not really something you can buy. It's not really something you can build. You have to earn it. And you have to earn it in very different ways, depending on who is giving the trust to what. So in the case of code, like I think that there's a lot at play in understanding when an agent takes actions on behalf of a user, where does responsibility lie between the agent, which is externalized to the user and their intent, with the developer, with the system that's supposed to protect them and the software that's moving through it. There's like a lot of characters that have different levels of responsibility to earn that trust, I think.
So if you're saying that, does trust in the agent rely on the agents itself, or is it about establishing if you trust the human operators or orchestrators of those agents?
I think it's actually neither. I think it's more about trusting the system that they're both operating within. Because if you create the golden path for developers to build safely and securely with tools in the right way that have the right levels of observability, then it becomes something that's innate to your development process. We're just not there yet. We're in that like messy learning stage. That's why we're having the conversation. But I certainly think it's something we can get to because we're still engineers at the bottom. At the end of the day, I see Claire nodding a lot. Maybe some of that resonates with what you're working on over at Aways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of what we found is a big part of it is building that system, that structure around these tools that you're using in the same way that we would have done previously with pre-AI tools, but making sure that we're keeping control of these things in order to maintain trust in the whole system and the output that we're producing. So whether that's having those kind of human checkpoints in place to be able to understand, what an agent has done at a certain stage, or put in a particular structure in, for example, restricting, it might be sort of restricting permissions around what the agents can do, narrowing the scope of what the agents can do. And so, you can be fairly certain they're not going to go kind of wandering off and doing things they shouldn't be. But yeah, what we found is, having those guardrails in place has really helped, the team to be more confident and trust more of what the agent does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to add to what Claire was saying, even like just strategically speaking, trust, I think, is going to be the big factor that determines whether the products that you're going to build will get adoption or not. I mean, it's a simple thing. You start, there's a novelty effect in the beginning. You try out a new agent, it's capable of these things, but then it breaks. What does your agent do at that time? Does it show you where it went wrong? Does it help you build that confidence? Or does it just give you a, I failed, and that's it? And the user has no idea what really happened. So even if the agent is like super capable, but it doesn't help you bring along in that journey and build that trust, you are not going to use it again. And in such a scenario, either of the two things will happen. Either the agent will be relegated to very trivial tasks where trust doesn't matter, the stakes are too low, in which case you've actually destroyed something that could have been a really big productivity multiplier. You just not used its potential fully, or it might get completely thrown away. And both of those scenarios don't sound good for improving the organizational efficiency and for the adoption of your product. So I think it's not just about trust is not optional anymore. It's a table stakes in the environment that we're operating in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that the team that one of the teams I've been working with, they've done they've kept autonomy within the team and enabled the team to be able to, if the agent does something that they don't expect, or does something, goes off down the wrong path, that they've got the power to make changes, be able to amend, adjust what the agent does. So when they use it in future, it's more likely to go off and, do the right things. And I think being able to, and allowing your developers, giving them that kind of empowerment to kind of build their own trust within the agents and improve it as they go along as well. I think that's really helpful for kind of keeping the momentum.
I think you're both hitting on two really important ingredients for building and earning that trust. 'Cause Priyanka, you're talking about the levels of transparency, of understanding when something does go wrong or gets derailed. How did we get there? What were the mechanisms that led us here? How can we then improve it? And then clear the other side of that coin of, okay, we improved it. Now, how do I keep my coworkers from stepping in that same pothole? How do I share that knowledge? And so having that like durable knowledge that builds over time. And like we've been doing this as an industry with things like skills that we share as a team, right? And so these have become really fundamental primitives of like working with the tools. And they're fundamental because they help us earn that trust. I can trust that when I ran this workflow or when I did this and it followed my skill, I know my skill adheres to this practice we've already established was good, or already steps over that pothole that I stepped in before. But to Priyanka's point, you have to have that like level of transparency with understanding when things do go wrong, or really being able to peer in and understand like on like a per session basis, even like what did derail, what did we learn, and you're constantly looking for learning opportunities.
And I think that's a good point. Like per session really makes sense because they're not acting like regular systems that may degrade over time, but they could hallucinate, they could change, they could just go off and do their own thing. We don't know yet. So that trust has to be continuous, because it's not just because it works once, it's not binary. It doesn't mean it will work again. So
because they're so probabilistic, it's really hard to see just trends, just like looking at like an aggregate level of like, oh, the models are doing good, we're using more tokens, oh, like the consumption's going up, because that's like a trap when you look at it that way, because because they are probabilistic, because the nature of how they run is very specific to where they're running, who's running them, what skills they have, and a lot of structure. There's a lot more detail where you do want to look at it almost a per session basis, or like in the case of like coding agents that are touching PRs and stuff on a PR basis. Like that's really critical to understand, because that's how you find those problems that then let you earn more trust.
Yeah. And Andrew raised a very interesting point where, as an industry, we try to quantify some of that probabilistic behavior with benchmarks, but trust goes a step beyond it. I think benchmark is more about the capability. What can the agent do and for how long it can run, for example, with the latest, meters benchmarks. But trust is earned in everyday interaction. It's when the developer is actually using it day to day. And it's not about benchmark, right? We've seen so many examples where the benchmarks will say that the model is really good, but then when you actually apply it on a real world application, it's totally different. It's your personal experience. And I think that's where it really matters on how can an agent build a trust.
So we have a vibrant audience. Thank you so much for that. That always makes for good things. So we have more of like kind of a statement that Daniel Phillips saying to kick off with. An AI agent acting on someone's behalf needs clear guardrails, whether it's operating inside a defined workflow or working locally on a user's device. Trust comes from knowing what that agent can do, what it cannot do, and where human oversight is required. Yeah, I think we can agree with that. And then Kieran says, calling in from London, that this is an interesting conversation. With the agentic workflows, the least privilege of traditional IAM or let's define that acronym for me, please, everyone. IAM?
I think it's identity.
It's permissions and identity.
Permission. Okay. Identity, what's it stand for though? Because we like to identify identity and access management, I guess. Moves on. So with the agentic workflows, the least privilege of traditional IAM moves on to least agency. Interesting choice of word, agency. The main difference being the non-deterministic nature of agents. What realistic steps are you adopting to revisit and renew the permissions for that agent in a dynamic manner? Great question.
I mean, so I was chatting to one of our developers the other day who's done a massive amount of work in the team in this area, and he's saying that telling the agent what not to do has been a big part of big part of kind of making sure, building trust in the workflows. So we kind of made sure that they've made sure that they put the permissions in place in terms of the agent structure. So where they've broken it down into sub-agents, some of those agents, can only read information. Some of them are able to read and write information, but they've kind of they've sort of fine-grained those permissions in order to make sure that they're able to trust what the agents are doing, and also they're not kind of relying on developers and their sort of prompt magic, and so having that kind of shared workflow, shared configuration as well, so everyone's kind of using those same permissions, and they're constantly kind of updating what the agent can and can't do, and kind of constantly evolving that. I think that's kind of really helped improve the workflow, and they've seen a lot of value from that.
Anybody doing anything different or to give this least privilege to the agents? Yeah, I think also we can't forget what the agents have access to, especially in your trust period, like data, customer data, employee data. You need to be dang sure and keep checking that you're sure if that's in there.
At that point, it's not even really about being sure. It comes again to having a system so you can observe what they are accessing and what they're touching and changing so that you can catch those things. Because oftentimes, those problems are going to float under your nose if you don't have that level of observability anyways.
So how does the human fit in here? Let's talk a bit about this idea of how and where, because more AI creates more code review to review, and code review becomes much more of a bottleneck, but it feels quite necessary. So how do we keep that agent in the loop with code reviews and refining tickets?
I think, sorry, go for it, Claire. You were going to go first.
So yeah, I know the team I've been working with have been been quite keen to make sure they've kept that sort of human in the loop, and so they are they'll do things in kind of some things in slightly different ways. But I know in terms of sort of refining tickets, they'll often get together and kind of, I know people historically did a lot of kind of mob programming, pair programming, but they will actually kind of use the agents sometimes as a group and pairs, and sort of, so they're kind of keeping those those sessions going, those collaborations, as well as bringing in the agent as a sort of an additional sort of collaborator, and sort of reviewing the code that's been generated that way. So that's been kind of really useful for them.
Yeah, I believe in, I've been calling it throupling, but the idea that you pair program with AI, because I think there's a risk that a lot of junior developers are missing the actual benefit of human pair programming by only pairing with AI, which is just, to me, not the point. Priyanka?
Yeah. And I totally agree with you, Claire. Like, this has to be some synergy. It just cannot, at least right now, in live production systems, we're just not at that stage where you can just have the agent go wild and do whatever it wants to. So I think the way I think about the human and the agentic involvement is, if you think about the entire software development life cycle, the agent is actively working on writing code, but there's a part that comes before it and there's a part that comes after it as well. It starts with an idea or an intent. You then write a prompt based off of that intent, and then you tell the agent to write code for something. It goes out, writes the code, comes back. Then somebody has to review that code. Once that's approved, then that gets merged. Within this whole process, there's a lot of different touch points at which the agent really has to do a lot of work, but also earn trust of that human and work alongside them to actually provide real value in this whole life cycle. So the way we're actually also building out at CodeRabbit is, in the beginning, when you're converting your intent to code, the agent should be able to show you how it is planning to prompt the coding agent. So, for example, the intent is like, integrate my tool with Salesforce. That's a one-line intent, but all the different classes it'll touch, all the different services it's going to touch, all the different tests that it'll write, or other blind spots that it may have missed, the research that it does on your code base, alternatives considered, discarded, and then the prompt that comes out. I think that's the way that you actually want to bring the human along. The goal of the AI should not be to replace it, but really helping them augment their understanding. So I see this as like the first moment of the agent earning the trust and bringing the human along is before the coding happens. Then I think the second part is, during the code is being written, actually being able to progressively disclose what is the agent writing. So you're given a prompt to the agent, like, go and change this API call and add this business logic behind it. Cool. But when it actually invokes the function, which calls did it make? Which APIs did it actually use under the hood? And what tests did it write corresponding to it? So being able to expose that information during the coding agent is the second moment where the agent really needs to bring the human along and earn that trust. And then I think the third part, which is where it gets more broad, and I'll explain in a moment why I say this, is after the code is written, when the code is being reviewed, I think we've entered into an age where we have a lot of these code review bots, which you look at a pull request and you see all the different 10 code bots, review bots have like, okay, here's a bug and here's a fix that you need to add, here's the security vulnerability that we've identified. But the side effect of all of that is that you increase the cognitive load on the human. Like, when I read a pull request today, I am lost, like, with so many different comments, and all of those are like a huge wall of text. I'm not reading through any of those. I'm rubber stamping it. So the real thing that an AI agent needs to do is make sure that I, as a developer, can understand it. Can I break down the code that's written into a way that the developer understands, absorbs, and feels like, this is what I would have written if I had done this coding job? If the developer comes out with that feeling, I think that's what we'll call as like successfully bringing the human along and earning trust. And why I said earlier that this goes broad is for two reasons. One, it's no longer just about the PR authors. It is very much about the PR reviewers also, because if you as an author are not reading your code, there is no way that the reviewer is reading your code, right? And the second part is this also serves as an immutable, exportable artifact. So that post hoc, when there's an incident and things have gone wrong and you cannot understand why the agent did something, and it's really common. Sorry, just a slight segue. The agent will say, like, I've done X, but I've also done Y and Z. Well, why did you do Y and Z? I just asked you to do X. That's such a common thing, it'll happen. So how do I debug what happened? And I will go back to this exportable, immutable artifact that was generated after the code was written to understand what really happened.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Big plus one, everything you just said, Priyanka, about how that trust is earned, but also too about the cognitive load increasing so much that the new role of the agent becomes to help the developer understand the code that they're producing together and take ownership of it, take ownership of it so they can earn that trust together. I also think it goes back to like honestly, I like how you called it like rubber stamping it. Like you go into a PR and you get almost overwhelmed. And it's because in the reality is that at some point in the last like 2, 3 years, not only has GitHub status page now been like peppered with like lots of orange and yellow, but all of these PRs are now becoming like they're like stages or they're like receipts more than they are places where the work is getting done. And that's just like a shift that developers are still adjusting to, because it used to be that you pushed your PR and then you went and you pinged your teammate and you're like, please review my PR. And then they hopped on there maybe at like 8 o'clock at night and says, look good to me. And it was like a deeply human exchange of like, I wrote this, you looked at it, you liked it, we're going to ship it. And now that's been so abstracted because there's so much more code that's uncomfortable. I think for a lot of developers, especially when they drop in and like you go in now and like, oh, your head spins when you look at the PR and oh, there's a bug here and like there's a cross compatibility issue here, and it's all great, it's all insightful. This is all stuff I want to fix. I want to make good software, but now I need my agent to help me. How do we cut through this? What matters? Like, what are the signals I need to be paying attention to? Because and the reality is that you're probably producing a lot of code. You're probably asking other people's agents to review PRs that your agent wrote. And there's such a level of abstraction that it ultimately comes down to the receipts later on. Because, there's a really good question in our Q&A about like, how does, a non-deterministic tool be predictable? And how do you measure it in reality? Like, what do you look at? You look at this exact thing, because now your PRs, instead of being this deeply human exchange of like, oh, this is awesome code at 8 p.m. at night, is now like a lane on a highway. And it's what everything is going through. And so because it's a lane, you need to understand that it's now a metric that you're tracking. You want to see like, how many PRs are we opening? When they're open, like how long are they staying open for before people do go in and look at it? And that could really speak to a level of cognitive load in your PRs. Maybe that means that we need to better understand our process and level up our system. And so, how do you make them be more predictable? You have the skills baked in. You look at your PRs and you treat them and their velocity, their cycle time, and then their delivery, right? Like, are they getting reworked later on? You look at all of that and you understand as an org, like, sure, we're burning like a gazillion tokens and our CFO is really mad about our Anthropic bill, but like, I can tell them that we're shipping really great code. Let me prove it. And that's how you get to the bottom of it with your team.
I would just say, yeah, is there any change to the end user experience, your customer experience? Because a lot of these companies doing what I think is purely crazy metrics that aren't getting 60% productivity. Who cares if there's too much change, because a lot of users don't want that much change, including myself, or there's nothing really happening in the user side. So, okay, you just justified laying off 10% of people because you have like X amount of allegedly more productivity, but it sounds like really more cost because of token maxing. So that's great. So I just want to add on to what the anonymous question that you referenced said. What are some of the metrics? Because I think around guardrails and constraints in general, because I think what they said, guardrails and constraints help with predictability, but do I trust myself that I added all the constraints?
Oh, I love that
I
question. Do I
guess it
trust
goes back
myself?
to
I think
platform engineering. Should you trust yourself, or should this be something that it's
you should
more
always be questioning your trust in yourself and your systems and the tools that you're using. And I think we have to acknowledge that we're running really fast, and not every foothold that you have while you're running as fast as possible is going to be as steady as the last one. So you constantly need to be reevaluating what are you sitting on top of. I mean, this is a great call to action. I said this to folks right before we started this panel, but like Fable is available right now. If you haven't taken Fable and pointed at all your skills and at your harness and at your hooks and at your everything, then you're missing an opportunity to figure out how to optimize your process. So I think there's just like in order to like have that you really just need to constantly be reflecting on your system. And in terms of like, oh, do I trust myself completely in all of the code you're doing? Well, if you have that question, I think you need to then challenge yourself to observe what it is that you lack trust in. Find that transparency, like what Priyanka said. Like, how can you peer in on this thing that you're unsure about?
And as a journalist, I ask that you share those learnings, because no one's talking about. We used to be like, fail fast, break things, blah, blah, blah. I know shit is breaking. No one's talking about it, which is just wild, because this is where learning happens. Claire?
Yeah, and I think, when you talk about kind of sharing those failures and sharing that it's not just the failures as well, it's sharing the sort of struggles that developers might have, engineers might have around their, like you say, the confidence in what they're producing, because they're getting overwhelmed by these PRs. They haven't kind of been as hands-on with the code. They might not have had that learning curve with the code base that they're working on, because they're relying heavily on the agents. So yeah, I think it's good for people to kind of share those experiences and how they're kind of overcoming those things.
We have Margarita asks, I think, a very fair kind of follow-up to ground this in specificity a bit, because it seems it's a lot. So she asks to be more specific and get a better picture also of the scope volume of how this works. Could you give an example of one agent your team built that has close to 100% trust? I like close to, because I think 100% trust in anything is silly. And then she asks, and how much time and iterations it took you to get there? So what would be like a specific agent that does what it's supposed to do and nothing more or less?
I do love this question. So I do not have any example agent I could tell you that has been close to earning 100% trust. And the reason for that is because I don't think there's a trust dashboard. I don't think there's a dashboard you could look at or a number you could look at to be like, yes, our trust number is 100%, which is the really hard part about like understanding, do I trust my code? Do other people trust what I'm doing either? And that's why the conversation is so difficult. But what I will say is, in terms of how much time and iterations it took to get there, for tools that I have built that I think have earned a level of trust in their stakeholders, I think it's about partnering with those stakeholders early and understanding that an agent is one part engineering and another part domain expertise, and they have to partner really early in any process to make something effective. And if the engineer starts too early and doesn't partner with the domain expert, they're not going to trust the tool that they're then expected to use. If the domain expert goes off on their own and builds it without the technical grounding, then they might build something that's hard to then scale or share with their teammates. So the earlier they pair, the better. And so, how do you iterate and get there faster? I think it's by bringing those skill sets together. They might be the same person now in your org. There's lots of folks who are both those people, but there's also folks that aren't, and you have to find ways to bring them together.
Absolutely. And I would just add, I think if you have 100% trust in something, you probably should have just done automation. You don't need agents for everything. And that binary is probably like you could have just automated a step. Has anyone found to that point, or how you reach that point, or maybe you haven't reached that point yet, where you have that sufficient, at least, I guess, the audit trail of it?
Yeah.
So to go into this question that's there in the Q&A,
Yeah, well,
Priyanka,
I
you
was
want to take?
thinking more that trust first. Like, is trust basically, you can't trust it's going to do what it says, but you always know what it did and why? Is that what
Yeah, I
trust?
mean,
How do you define
trust and auditing are hand in hand. Going to this question from the attendee that's in our chat is that, how do you have a sufficiently complete audit trail so that when things go wrong, you can unwind what happened or get like a proxy of the idea? This is a really smart question to ask. Like, what artifacts do you gather and how deep do you go on that debugging? And I think it just depends on obviously the stakes of what that agent is working on and doing. There are some baseline things that you should be doing everywhere. You should obviously be keeping your transcripts, having a sort of record of the conversations that are producing your code. It's probably a good sense to get a sense of what models you're using and at what frequency, right? What tools are they using? Are they connecting the MCP servers? You probably want to embrace some really great technology for this. There's things like Agent Gateway, which is an Agentic AI Foundation project. It's a growth phase project for being like an API layer with the Linux Foundation for you to like serve and understand your agent inference at scale. So you use a tool like that, you aggregate your sessions, you save your logs. And frankly, I think this also speaks too to like some of the uncomfort with like the Git forge. Like the PR has changed into this like strange like highway instead of this cool like buddy to buddy experience. And so the same thing needs to happen with Git itself. Like we need our sessions to be in these PRs and in the code. It's almost like the Git forge itself also is going through a little bit of growing pain. So then we're stuck asking these questions of like, what do I audit and where does it go? But I think ultimately it's probably all going to live where the code is.
Yeah, I strongly agree with this. I think, Andrew, you raised such an important point where our tools need to really evolve to serve the right audience. And I think whatever product you're building, I don't know who the asker is, but whatever product you're building, you need to first like start with having clarity on who your audience is, what information they care about, and why. And if you work backwards from there, you can make sure that you're not erring on the side of under explainability or over explainability. To substantiate this with an example, suppose you have a solutions engineer who is working on uh, adding a fix that a customer or that a prospect requested in their POV. So maybe for them, just showing that, when an agent ran, here's the outcome and here the narrative behind that outcome is enough. But if you have a backend engineer who is building out the whole feature end to end and they are going through an incident, maybe what they need is a much deeper summary of here are the tool calls explored, here are the branches, here are the other, some of the examples that Andrew gave earlier would be a good fit for that kind of use case. So knowing their audience and what is the job that they're looking to do will also determine the level of information that you expose. Having said that, I think there are some parts that are always constant in whatever use case you pick up. And this is about what kind of explainability you're building. Is it a synchronous explainability or is it asynchronous? So synchronous meaning the agent is running and the human is actually watching it. In that case, you can be a little bit more live about, I tried this branch and then, okay, I found this limitation with it. So I backtracked and then I tried out something different. But when you're thinking about asynchronous explainability, which I think your question gets more to the bottom of, the artifact has to be exportable and has to be immutable. And you have to think of it from a perspective of a reader who has no background whatsoever. So you cannot give them a 250-page novel of everything that it did, but also it cannot just be like a one-page summary for a person who's been in this domain for 10 years. And that's why I go back to like knowing your audience is really important. And these are some of the rules that honestly, we've known pre-agentic era too. So there are something that stay constant. What has changed is that now you're responsible for the agent's actions too. So in addition to understanding your audience, you also need to understand your agent and be that bridge between the two.
By the way, I just wanted to share a recommendation from the audience that because part of this is stepping back and learning communication again, because there are always more stakeholders and the agents don't matter if the people in process, in my opinion, don't matter if the people in processes aren't in place. So an audience member recommended Amy Edmondson's The Right Kind of Wrong, which talks about intelligent failures, how to be an elite failure practitioner, or often we even use the word failure moments to learn, because we're not really learning from success as much as moments to learn. But yeah, we call them failures. So as we wind down, what systems processes do we need in place for human agentic collaboration? What is the best first step? Because I don't think most companies are as agentic as companies are saying they are. I think a lot of companies, and especially a lot of our listeners that maybe work for banks and other heavily regulated industries, things right now are in the innovation silos, which again, that isn't where learning happens. That's where a lot of experimentation and some great things, some learning happens, of course, not to downgrade those people. But what are some of those, what's that first step to be in this, I guess, utopia of human agentic collaboration?
I think so. I've got a couple of teams, and one is kind of much further down the road than the other. So one of my teams is kind of taking very sort of tentative first steps into using agents, and they're kind of, I think the important thing, I suppose, like with anything, is they're starting off small. So they might be starting off with agents that kind of might do research or refinement of tickets. So it's kind of a lower risk kind of area. So, and to help the team build their confidence with using the agents, with what the agent outputs, with how they can, the kind of prompting and things that they can do to, get the agent to do what they want it to do. And that's where we've been starting, just kind of working working in a group together to evaluate how that's working. And they've seen some good successes so far, and that team are still very early in their kind of learning journey with Agentic. So, and we're just going to keep kind of building it up from there. And it's just about building the team's confidence in what they're doing, confidence in what the agents outputting, and their sort of trust in the workflow and the system.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Please,
that organization and individual gains are very different from each other. And so, Jen, I think you're right to call out that, like, oh yeah, all these tech companies, they say they're super agentic, and then you look inside and they're not, or they're restricted, or it's siloed somewhere. That's a reality everywhere, even at like the most advanced practitioner-based companies in our industry right now, I think that happens. And so it's because, the individual's ability to learn and operate and orchestrate and handle and then loop and do all this stuff with agents is a uniquely kind of like siloed to their past experience, how much coding experience do they even have, what's their domain experience, how fluent are they with the particular skill set that's needed to be good with agents, which is more like a manager kind of mindset around like what's the impact of what I'm trying to drive. And so you get these like pockets of folks, like what Claire said, like she has two teams that she directly manages. You would think these teams would have so much overlap and communication, but ultimately you get these very different kind of accelerations of progress, even within the same orgs that are adjacent to each other. And so I think that speaks to, like, on an organization level, there's a lot of work we still have to do as managers to like align our teams, to level up the best practices, to find that like 1000x engineer and be like, okay, that's cool, but how can I make just a 10x everyone instead of having a 1000x you, right? How do we distribute this? And I think those are kind of the finicky conversations that we're having now. But it's a good call out, Jen, because yeah, obviously companies will be like, yes, we're super agentic. Yes, everyone here is using agents. What do you mean? But at the end of the day, yeah, it varies from person to person.
Strong +1, super strong +1 to what Claire and Andrew both have said. And I think honestly, it's as much a cultural problem as it is a technological problem. Because culture is a very important part of it, and it cannot be enforced by, hey, you need to adopt AI. Nobody is going to do it. Like, people are inherently resistant to change. We have to understand it. And we all are too at some level. I think they're just being transparent about where we stand. But what pushes people along is when they see the real value add from doing certain things. If you have somebody in the org who is actually able to use some of these tools in a meaningful manner and showcase the outcomes they can help bring along, and I think the how is the easy part from there on. You can have knowledge transfer sessions, you can embed them into different pockets, like Andrew was saying, within different orgs. But I think like really showing that this is doable, this has value is a big part of driving that AI culture. But I think it is also a technological problem. It's not only cultural, because it is the new product's responsibility to inspire that trust and confidence. And it is similar to how, if you meet a new human being, how do you begin to trust them? Well, it takes time, but also when things are going wrong, how do they respond? When your agent is did something wrong, is it able to show you? Is it able to tell you that, here is where it failed and that's why things shut down? Or is it actually hallucinating, or is it telling you like, okay, everything is fine, but under the hood it's a mess? I think that's where the key differentiator would be, and the products which can actually get this right would be here to stay for the long run. And I feel particularly strongly about it because I think with the foundational models building out a lot of the capabilities, the layer on top of that is really going to be the explainability layer. And every product will eventually boil down to being an explainability layer of some sort. Um,
Mhm.
I understand it is going to be like one AI tool explaining the other AI tool and then explaining the other AI tool. It's that recursive loop. I see that. But I think where it bottoms out is the human being. Can that tool really help the human being understand what is going on and give them the information that they need at that abstraction level?
And
So,
can people feel safe if it doesn't to speak up and say that's not working out? Sorry,
exactly,
we adopted the wrong tool. Can we move on?
exactly.
And just to mention something, because as we wind down, Daniel said that he works in fintech. Low-risk AI agents such as pulling error logs after release and proposing hypotheses and replicating the issue with a repeatable test. Whether it's related to release and risk level, these are things all we have to consider. And I think honestly, let's be truthful, we are just on a journey. It's not, I mean, how long has cloud transformation's been going on for? Let's not rush. We've seen what sloppy mess happens, sloppy, if you rush things like this. Good luck, everyone. And thank you so much, Priyanka. Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you, listeners, and a very dynamic audience. We're on a learning curve, but we all want to hear how you're learning. Good luck, y'all.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.